There comes a time in history when a single phrase, a single decision, or a single event becomes more than just politics. It becomes a symbol, a mirror that reflects not only the state of a nation, but the condition of the human soul. Trump's Chicago takeover. Why leaders are calling it a threat to freedom. When you hear a title like that, you might be tempted to think this is only about one man, one leader, one city. But I want you to understand something deeper. This is not just about politics or parties or the chaos of the headlines. This is about the invisible war that builds or breaks your destiny. Chicago, in this metaphor, is not only a city, it is every heart, every mind, every soul that finds itself under siege. It is the battlefield of freedom. And Trump, in this metaphor, is not merely a politician. He is the symbol of any force, any fear, any figure that seeks to control your destiny. Freedom is not stolen overnight. It is chipped away. Not by bombs, not by armies, but by invisible wars, wars of mindset, wars of deception, wars of fear. And if you do not see them for what they are, if you do not recognize the subtle invasion into your thoughts, your beliefs, your values, you will one day wake up and realize the takeover already happened. So let me tell you this truth. Every human being is living in Chicago right now. Every human being is facing a takeover. And the question that will decide your destiny is this: will you allow fear, corruption, and control to dominate your mind? Or will you rise, take ownership of your freedom, and declare victory over the invisible war? The invisible war of freedom, freedom has always been fragile. Nations fight for it, but so do individuals. You see, the enemy of freedom is not only external. It lives inside us, whispering doubts, planting fears, convincing us that we are powerless. That is the real Chicago takeover. It is the siege of the human spirit. Think about it when leaders declare something a threat to freedom. What they're really pointing to is a war of influence. Who gets to decide how you think? Who gets to shape what you believe is possible? Who gets to define your destiny? You or the powers that seek to control you? The invisible war is not fought with bullets. It is fought with words, with policies, with propaganda, with fear. It is fought in the headlines, in the schools, in the workplaces, and yes, in your own mind. The takeover of the mind, let's be honest. Many of us have already surrendered parts of our freedom. We allow fear to dictate what risk we take. We allow comfort to trap us in lives of quiet desperation. We allow the loudest voices in society to tell us what is possible instead of deciding for ourselves. That is the most dangerous takeover of all. You can lose money and rebuild. You can lose a job and recover. You can lose relationships and heal. But when you lose the freedom of your own mind, when you hand over your destiny to outside forces, you have lost the very essence of life. And yet, here is the good news. No one can fully conquer your mind unless you consent. No one can truly change your destiny unless you submit. The invisible war may be fierce, but victory is always within reach if you decide that freedom is non-negotiable. Why leaders fear true freedom now, you may ask. Why is freedom always under attack? Why do so many leaders throughout history fight to control the masses instead of liberating them? The answer is simple: because true freedom makes you unpredictable. True freedom makes you powerful. A free mind cannot be manipulated. A free spirit cannot be bought. A free people cannot be enslaved by false promises or controlled by fear. And that terrifies those who thrive on domination. So the so-called Chicago takeover is not just a political story. It is a timeless story. The story of leaders who fear the power of awakened citizens. The story of institutions that profit when people remain blind. The story of forces that prefer control over liberation. But let me remind you of this: every single great breakthrough in history came not from the rulers, but from the rebels. Not from the oppressors, but from the dreamers. Not from the takeover, but from the resistance. The destiny question, so I return to the question: will this invisible war build or break your destiny? It is not enough to point fingers at corrupt leaders. It is not enough to complain about the state of politics, or the economy, or society. The real battleground is within you. The real war is for your courage, your clarity, your conviction. Freedom will not be given to you. You must claim it. You must fight for it. And you must guard it every single day of your life. Because here is the truth: the greatest threat to freedom is not a politician. It is not a policy. It is not even a government. The greatest threat to freedom is the person who looks back at you in the mirror when you choose fear over faith, excuses over action, comfort over courage. That is the invisible war. And that is why leaders call it a threat. Because when enough people awaken to their true power, when enough people declare that their destiny is their own, when enough people refuse to be taken over, you cannot stop that force. There are battles that the world can see. Nations at war, protests in the streets, laws written and rewritten in the halls of power. But then there are battles the world cannot see. They rage silently beneath the surface, inside the human mind and spirit. These are the wars that shape everything else. These are the invisible wars. And among them, none is greater than the invisible war for freedom. We often think of freedom as something outside of us, a political right, a constitutional guarantee, a promise signed on paper. But freedom begins long before the ink of law and the marching of armies. Freedom begins in the human soul. It begins in the courage to think your own thoughts, to hold your own convictions, to believe in the possibility of your own destiny. But here is the truth few dare to admit. Freedom is always under attack, not just from governments or tyrants, but from fear, from lies, from the invisible chains that seek to bind you before you even realize you are in captivity. And that is why the invisible war for freedom is not fought out there. It is fought right here in the quiet corners of the mind. You see, the easiest way to enslave a people is not to build prisons or write laws of oppression. The easiest way to enslave a people is to convince them that they were never free to begin with. If you can control a person's belief about themselves, you never need to chain their body. Their mind will do the work for you. This is why leaders who fear true liberty always attack the mind first. They spread doubt. They magnify fear. They pit neighbor against neighbor. They create illusions of choice while keeping the real levers of power hidden. And while you think you are free, you live inside a carefully crafted illusion. That illusion is the invisible war. And until you awaken to it, you cannot fight back. The silent enemy within, the greatest enemy of freedom, is not always external oppression. Sometimes it is internal submission. Think of the countless times you have silenced yourself because of fear. Think of the dreams you buried because someone told you they were unrealistic. Think of the times you chose comfort instead of courage, excuses instead of action. In those moments, the war for freedom was not lost on the battlefield of nations. It was lost within your own heart. That is why every empire throughout history has invested in propaganda. That is why every tyrant seeks to rewrite history. That is why every manipulator whispers doubts into your ear. Because once they capture your mind, they no longer need to capture your body. And yet, even knowing this, people surrender every day. They surrender their independence for security. They trade their voice for acceptance. They give away their destiny in exchange for approval. And slowly, silently, the invisible war is lost. The fragility of freedom here is something you must understand. Freedom is not permanent. It is not a one-time gift. It is a discipline, a practice, a way of living. A free nation can lose its liberty in a single generation if its people fall asleep. A free individual can lose their destiny in a single moment if they choose fear over faith. That is how fragile freedom is. It demands constant vigilance. The invisible war is not won once and for all. It must be fought every day. The moment you stop guarding your mind, the invasion begins again. This is why so many people live lives of quiet desperation. They believe they are free, yet they are chained. Not by walls, but by beliefs. Not by guards, but by doubt. Not by laws, but by invisible forces of control. The cost of ignorance, one of the most dangerous weapons in the invisible war, is ignorance. When people are blind to the battle, they lose without even knowing it. Ignorance convinces you that freedom is someone else's problem. It convinces you that your choices don't matter, that your destiny is fixed, that your voice is powerless. And when enough people believe that lie, entire nations collapse into tyranny. But let me tell you, this ignorance is not innocence. Ignorance is surrender. Every time you refuse to learn, refuse to question, refuse to think for yourself, you hand your freedom over to those who will gladly use it for their own gain. The invisible war is fueled by the complacency of the many and won by the courage of the few. History is full of examples. The revolutionaries who refused to bow, the visionaries who challenge authority, the dreamers who defied oppression. They understood that freedom is not something you inherit. It is something you fight for, guard, and renew in every generation. And so it is with you. The invisible war for freedom is raging in your own life. The question is not whether you are in it. The question is whether you will fight or surrender. There are moments in life when a city ceases to be just a place. It becomes something far greater, something eternal, something etched into the memory of humanity. A city becomes more than buildings, more than streets, more than skylines. It becomes a mirror of destiny, a battlefield of ideas, a living symbol of the invisible war we all face. Rome was once more than a city. It became a symbol of empire, of power, of ambition that stretched across the world. Jerusalem was more than stone walls. It became the symbol of faith, conflict, and spiritual awakening. Athens was not only a cluster of marble structures. It became the symbol of human thought, democracy, and philosophy, and so it is with every age. Cities rise and fall. Some burn and are rebuilt. Others fade quietly into history. But the ones that endure in memory are not remembered for their architecture alone. They are remembered for what they represented, for the ideas, the struggles, the victories, and the defeats they carried within their streets. This is what it means when cities become symbols. They transcend geography. They transform into metaphors of destiny. And today, as we look around the world, whether it is Chicago, Washington, New York, Los Angeles, or any city that finds itself in the headlines, we must ask, what does this city symbolize? What does it tell us about ourselves, about our times, about the invisible wars shaping our lives? Because cities are not only places where people live. They are places where people fight, where they hope, where they rise, where they fall. And when a city becomes a symbol, it tells a story about humanity itself. The city as a reflection of the soul, let me take you deeper. Every city is a collection of human stories. Behind every window, there is a dream. Behind every door, there is a struggle. Behind every street corner, there is a memory. Cities are alive not because of their buildings, but because of the people who give them life. And just as a city can rise into greatness, so can a human being. Just as a city can fall into decay, so can a soul. Just as a city can rebuild after fire, flood, or ruin, so can you rebuild after loss, betrayal, or failure. When cities become symbols, they are not only symbols of nations. They are symbols of us. Your life can be a Rome, a Jerusalem, an Athens, a Chicago, a Detroit, a New York. Your life can symbolize empire, faith, philosophy, struggle, rebirth, or resilience. The question is not what the city represents. It is what you choose your life to represent. Chicago as a symbol, take Chicago, for instance. To some, it is a city of industry and grit, of resilience and rebirth after the Great Fire. To others, it is a symbol of corruption, crime, political battles, and unrest. To many, it is both, the glory of resilience and the scars of struggle intertwined. But this is the truth about symbols. They are never one-sided. A symbol is powerful precisely because it carries both shadow and light. When leaders speak of cities as threats or as beacons, when headlines elevate them into symbols of freedom or control, what they are really doing is telling us about the invisible war between order and chaos, freedom and fear, growth and decay. And so Chicago is not just a place. It is an idea of what happens when resilience collides with corruption, an idea of what happens when power battles with people, an idea of what happens when destiny is at war with distraction. If you look closely, you will see that Chicago is not only about Chicago. It is about all of us. It is about the war every individual faces, to rise above their circumstances or to be dragged down by them. Cities as metaphors for life, think of it this way. A thriving city symbolizes a thriving life full of opportunity, energy, and possibility. A broken city symbolizes a broken soul, one overwhelmed by crime, fear, or corruption. A rebuilding city symbolizes resilience, the ability to start again stronger than before. A divided city symbolizes inner conflict, the war between your highest self and your deepest fears. This is why cities become symbols. They show us on a grand stage what we live in our private battles every day. When you read about a city struggling with crime, ask yourself, what parts of my own life are under siege? When you read about a city rising in innovation, ask yourself, what new ideas am I building within my soul? When you read about a city burning and then rebuilding, ask yourself, am I willing to rise from my own ashes? The invisible war is not only fought in headlines, it is fought in hearts. And cities, when they become symbols, are simply magnified reflections of the wars we already fight within ourselves. The power of collective destiny. Here is something extraordinary about cities. They remind us that destiny is not only individual, but also collective. A city is not built by one person alone. It is built by thousands, millions, each contributing their labor. their vision, their energy. In the same way, the destiny of your life is not shaped by you alone. Yes, your choices matter, your mindset matters, your discipline matters. But you are also influenced by the voices you allow into your life, the people you surround yourself with, the leaders you follow, the communities you participate in. This is why it is so vital to understand the symbolism of cities. Because when a city rises, it means people came together with a vision. When a city falls, it means the vision was corrupted, neglected, or lost. And the same is true for you. If your life feels like a city in decay, it may be because the voices you have allowed in your council, the leaders, the influences, the companions, are not aligned with the destiny you desire. If your life feels like a city under siege, it may be because you've allowed corruption, fear, doubt, excuses to infiltrate the walls of your mind. But here is the truth. Just as a city can change course, so can you. Just as a city can rebuild, so can you. Just as a city can symbolize greatness, so can you. There is a war happening right now, not one of tanks, bombs, or soldiers marching in the streets, but something far more dangerous. It is the silent war, the invisible war, the kind of war that doesn't leave buildings in ashes, but leaves dreams in ruins. It is not a war you see. It is a war you feel. It is not a war declared by nations, but one declared by the voices inside your head and the forces that try to control them. This is the real takeover. The real takeover is not when politicians argue on TV. It is not when economies rise or fall. It is not when cities face conflict. No, the real takeover happens long before the news headlines. It happens in the mind, in the heart, in the very core of who you are. You see, when people talk about takeovers, they often point to governments, leaders, or corporations. But what is a nation, really, if not a reflection of the people who live within it? What is a leader, if not the product of collective fear, collective hope, or collective blindness? The real takeover is the moment you begin to believe that you are powerless. It is the moment you begin to accept mediocrity as your destiny. It is the moment you start living by someone else's script instead of writing your own. That is the invisible invasion. That is the true threat. How takeovers begin. Takeovers don't happen all at once. No tyrant storms into your life in a single day. No invisible enemy conquers your mind with one blow. It happens quietly, gradually, almost unnoticed. A doubt here, a fear there, a whispered voice that says, "You're not good enough." A subtle suggestion, "Why even try? You'll fail anyway." A headline that tells you the world is broken beyond repair. A system that rewards complacency over courage. That is how takeovers begin, with small concessions, with tiny agreements between you and fear, with quiet moments where you trade freedom for comfort, destiny for convenience, greatness for survival. And before you know it, the real takeover has already happened. Not in Washington, not in Chicago, not in any external battlefield, but in the one battlefield that has always mattered most, your mind. The mind is the prize. Why do you think history's most powerful rulers, empires, and systems have always fought not only for land, but for loyalty? Because controlling territory means nothing if you cannot control thought. The true battlefield of every era has been the human mind. If a leader can convince you that you are powerless, you will never resist. If a system can train you to obey without question, you will never rebel. If fear can persuade you that your dreams are impossible, you will never even try. That is the ultimate strategy of the real takeover, not to imprison your body, but to imprison your imagination. Not to steal your freedom outright, but to convince you that freedom was never possible in the first place. The takeover of potential, every time you doubt yourself, you surrender ground in this invisible war. Every time you silence your voice, you concede power. Every time you postpone your dreams, you hand over your destiny to forces that thrive on your hesitation. This is why so many live lives of quiet desperation. Not because the world conspired against them, but because they unknowingly agreed to the terms of the takeover. They let fear sign the contract. They let society dictate the script. They let smallness govern their destiny. But I need you to hear me now. You were not born to live under siege. You were not born to be controlled. You were not born to be a victim of invisible forces that chain your spirit. You were born free. You were born powerful. You were born to create, to rise, to lead. The real takeover can only succeed when you forget this truth. The subtlety of control, here's the danger. Control rarely comes dressed in chains. It comes dressed in comfort. It comes disguised as safety. It presents itself as normal, reasonable, even logical. Don't take risks. It's too dangerous. Stay in your lane. Don't stand out. Wait until the timing is perfect. Just be grateful with what you have. On the surface, these voices sound harmless, even wise. But beneath them lies the strategy of the takeover to keep you in a small, predictable box, to make sure you never wake up to the greatness within you, to lull you into sleep while your destiny is quietly stolen away. This is why so many people never live the life they were meant to live, because the takeover does not come with alarms and warnings. It comes with soft whispers and comfortable lies. Resistance requires awareness, so how do you resist? How do you fight a war that is invisible? It begins with awareness. You cannot win a war you don't even know exists. The first step is to recognize the signs of takeover in your own life. Where have you settled for less? Where have you accepted limitations that are not real? Where have you allowed others to define what is possible for you? These are not small questions. They are life and death questions for your destiny. Because every time you say yes to fear, you say no to freedom. Every time you agree to live small, you decline the invitation to live great. Every time you allow yourself to be conquered within, you set the stage for being conquered without. The real takeover is always internal first. And if you can reclaim the mind, you can reclaim everything. Freedom is fragile, not because it is weak, but because it is constantly under attack. Not because it lacks power, but because too many forget how easily it can be lost. Freedom is the air we breathe yet take for granted. It is the light in the darkness, and yet most people live as though it will shine forever without tending. They assume liberty is permanent, that rights are guaranteed, that destiny is protected by invisible hands. But history has shown us again and again that freedom is the most delicate treasure on earth, and like anything fragile, it must be guarded, it must be valued, it must be defended with vigilance. Not once, not twice, but every single day of your life. The silent theft of freedom. Here's the truth about freedom. It is rarely lost in one dramatic moment. It doesn't usually disappear with one grand announcement or sudden collapse. No, freedom erodes quietly, bit by bit, inch by inch, while people are busy, distracted, or comfortable. It's taken not by force alone, but by fear, by propaganda, by the invisible chains of the mind. Think about it, a nation doesn't wake up one morning enslaved. A person doesn't suddenly find themselves without choices. No, it happens slowly, through small concessions, through the acceptance of mediocrity, through the surrender of personal responsibility. And then one day you realize the walls have closed in. The options are gone. The dreams are silent. That is the fragility of freedom. It slips away not in explosions, but in whispers. The inner war, but let's not only speak of political freedom, because the deeper truth is this: the greatest freedom under attack is not your nation's. It is your own mind's. The invisible war is fought inside your heart. It is the struggle between the version of you that longs for courage, progress, and destiny, and the version of you that prefers comfort, safety, and submission. Every day, you are presented with a choice. Do you claim the freedom to live fully, or do you surrender it for the illusion of security? Do you step forward into uncertainty, or do you retreat into the cage of the familiar? And that's why freedom is fragile, because it depends on your courage. It depends on your willingness to guard it, to nurture it, to sacrifice for it. Without vigilance, freedom collapses, not by external takeover, but by internal neglect. The weight of complacency, the most dangerous enemy to freedom, is not a tyrant. It is not a dictator. It is not a corrupt government or an unjust system. The most dangerous enemy is complacency. When people believe freedom is guaranteed, they stop fighting for it. When they believe liberty is permanent, they stop protecting it. When they assume destiny will always wait, they stop pursuing it. Complacency makes people weak. And when people grow weak, they become easy to control. They trade freedom for comfort. They exchange liberty for illusions of safety. They sell their destiny for a paycheck, their soul for approval, their mind for the ease of following the crowd. And here is the hard truth: every empire that fell, every society that crumbled, every dream that died was not destroyed overnight. It was weakened by complacency. It was broken by those who thought freedom was unshakable. Freedom is fragile, and complacency is the silent hand that drops it to the floor. The cost of forgetting. Do you know why freedom feels fragile? Because every generation forgets what the previous one fought for. Your ancestors, your forefathers, your predecessors, they bled for it. They sacrificed for it. They risked everything for the chance to live free. But human memory is short, and gratitude fades quickly. Today's ease is built on yesterday's sacrifice. But when that sacrifice is forgotten, the ease becomes entitlement. And entitlement blinds you to the cost of freedom. This is why history repeats itself, because every generation must learn the same lesson: freedom is not free. It demands discipline. It demands awareness. It demands that you recognize its fragility and handle it with reverence. The personal fragility of freedom. But let's bring this closer to home. Let's strip away the politics, the nations, the headlines. Look at your own life. You, right now, have freedoms others would die for. The freedom to think your own thoughts. The freedom to choose your path. The freedom to start, to fail, to rise again. But how are you treating those freedoms? Are you nurturing them? Or are you wasting them? Do you wake up with gratitude for the chance to shape your destiny? Or do you let fear dictate your decisions? Do you seize opportunities, or do you surrender them to excuses? Your personal freedom is fragile because every compromise you make chips away at it. Every time you silence your own voice to fit in. Every time you lower your standards to avoid rejection. Every time you accept less than you deserve because fighting for more feels hard. That is how freedom collapses, not with a bang, but with a sigh. Not with chains, but with choices. The mirror test, so let me ask you a question. If freedom is fragile, how are you handling it in your own life? When you look in the mirror, do you see someone who values liberty? Someone who refuses to let fear or manipulation dictate their destiny? Or do you see someone who has quietly surrendered, who has allowed the invisible war to conquer without even raising a fight? Because the mirror doesn't lie. Freedom is not an abstract concept. It is a reflection of how you live. It is the sum of your choices, your standards, your courage. And if you cannot stand in front of that mirror and declare, I am free, then somewhere along the way, you surrendered your most fragile treasure. There is a war raging right now, and most people don't even realize they are on the battlefield. There are no tanks rolling down your street, no soldiers kicking in your doors, no missiles lighting up the night sky. Yet the war is real, the casualties are real, and the consequences are life or death. This is the battle for your mind. Every day, forces you cannot see are fighting for control of the most valuable territory in existence: your thoughts, your beliefs, your imagination, your identity. If they win, they don't just take your peace, they take your destiny. And if you win, you don't just survive, you rise into the life you were created to live. This is not a physical war. This is a war of ideas, a war of influence, a war of psychology. And while many sleep through it, unaware that they are even involved, others recognize the truth, that every thought is a soldier, every belief is a weapon, and every decision is a step toward victory or defeat. The mind as the first battlefield. Why is the mind the first and most important battlefield? Because once your mind is conquered, everything else follows. Think about it. A person who believes they are powerless will never try to change their circumstances. A person convinced they are unworthy will sabotage every opportunity that comes their way. A person consumed by fear will shrink when life demands courage. No chains are as heavy as the chains of belief, and no prison is as inescapable as the prison of the mind. That is why the battle for your mind is the most important battle you will ever fight. It is not about politics. It is not about economics. It is not even about relationships. It is about the very essence of who you are and who you will become. Invisible enemies, the enemies in this battle rarely announce themselves. They come disguised. They infiltrate your life without fanfare. They look like the voices that say, you're not good enough. They sound like the doubts that whisper, why even try? You'll just fail. They show up as fear, hesitation, procrastination, distraction, envy, and comparison. And here's the cruel truth. Most people don't even realize they are fighting these enemies, so they surrender without knowing it. They give up their dreams. They stop chasing their goals. They let life shrink them into a shadow of who they could be. But once you recognize these enemies for what they are, you begin to fight differently. You no longer take thoughts at face value. You question them. You challenge them. You decide which ones get to stay and which ones must be destroyed. The weapons of influence, let's take this deeper. The battle for your mind is not only personal, it's also societal. Every day, billions of dollars are spent by corporations, media outlets, politicians, and influencers who all want a piece of your attention. Why? Because attention is the gateway to belief, and belief is the gateway to control. When a company convinces you that happiness comes in a box, you give them your money. When a politician convinces you that fear is your only option, you give them your loyalty. When society convinces you that you are small, powerless, and replaceable, you give them your obedience. This is why you must never let your guard down. You cannot afford to be passive in the battle for your mind. If you are not choosing what to think, someone else is choosing for you. The price of surrender, let me tell you what happens when you lose this battle. You stop dreaming. You stop believing. You start living on autopilot, repeating the same days over and over until your life becomes a circle instead of a journey. You start measuring your worth by the opinions of others instead of the vision within you. You let fear dictate the size of your goals. You let circumstances define the size of your faith. You accept chains you were never meant to wear. And eventually you wake up to a life you don't even recognize. You look in the mirror and wonder, who have I become? When did I stop fighting? That is the price of surrender in the battle for your mind, the power of awareness. But here's the good news. Awareness is the first step to victory. The moment you realize your thoughts are not random but strategic. The moment you understand that every doubt, every fear, every temptation is part of a larger war to keep you small. You change the way you live. You begin to guard your thoughts like a warrior guards a fortress. You don't allow toxic voices to enter your gates. You don't entertain lies. You don't let fear sit at your table. Instead, you feed your mind with truth. You choose beliefs that strengthen you, not weaken you. You choose to surround yourself with people, books, environments, and ideas that remind you of your greatness. Because in this battle, what you feed your mind becomes your weapon. Garbage in, garbage out. Power in, power out. The warrior within understands this. You were not born to be a victim of this war. You were born to be a warrior in it. Every great man and woman who ever achieved anything worth remembering fought this same battle. They heard the same doubts. They felt the same fears. They faced the same temptations to give up. But they chose to fight. They chose to discipline their minds, to master their thoughts, to replace lies with truth. And that is why they won. You have that same power within you. You are not weak. You are not helpless. You are not a pawn in someone else's game, unless you decide to be. The warrior within you is waiting. And once you unleash that warrior, you become unstoppable.